Welcome to Better Teaching, Only Stuff That Works, a podcast for teachers, instructional coaches, administrators, and anyone else who supports teachers in the classroom. This show is a proud member of the BE Podcast Network, shows that help you go beyond education. Find all our shows at bepodcastnetwork.com. I am Gene Tavernetti, the host for this podcast, and my goal for this episode, like all episodes, is that you laugh at least once and that you leave with an actionable idea for better teaching. A quick reminder, no cliches, no buzzwords, only stuff that works. My guest today is Meg Lee. Meg is a forerunner in implementing evidence-informed practice in schools and districts, and who co-founded Learning Science Partners with Dr. Jim Heal, a public school educator in a variety of roles, from teacher to professional learning specialist to school-based administrator to central executive leader. For 30 years, Meg directed induction and professional learning for a large, innovative public school that implemented evidence-informed practice and worked to ensure every educator understands how learning happens. Through Learning Science Partners, she and Jim work with schools, districts, teacher preparation programs, and organizations to infuse learning science into the daily work of teaching and learning. She serves as a core teacher for learning science and advisor for professional learning at Academica University of Applied Sciences in Amsterdam. She is also the author of Mindsets for Parents, Strategies to Encourage Growth Mindsets in Kids, which is in its second edition, and has taught education and psychology courses at the graduate level. Her work in the science of learning has led her to collaborative projects with ASCD, ISTE, Edutopia, the Teaching Channel, Learning Forward, the Center for Transformative Teaching and Learning, and the Education Writers Association. In addition, Meg is the United States Ambassador for Research Ed. I think we're going to enjoy this one and learn a lot from Meg Lee. Good morning, Meg. Thank you for being on Better Teaching, Only Stuff That Works.
Thanks, Gene. I'm excited to be with you.
Well, Meg, I met you and became familiar with what you do, a little bit of what you do through Research Ed, and we've had a chance to stay in touch, and I've learned about your experiences in Frederick, and now you're moving on into some more exciting things, as we said into your bio. But before we put Frederick completely in the rearview mirror, I have some questions about at a leadership level, at a, where we're making decisions about how some of these decisions were made to move in the direction of more evidence-based learning. Can you kind of give us a little history of that?
Sure. Well, Gene, Frederick will never be in the rearview mirror for me because it's where I started. It's where my colleagues are, and it's very near and dear to my heart. And I think the idea of grounding our practice in Frederick in evidence and becoming an evidence-informed, equity-driven district. Certainly, that was a long-standing goal, and it's the kind of work that takes a long time to happen. And it was certainly done with the support and valuable advice of many people. And so a much collaborative effort, and one that involved leadership at all levels. So teacher leadership, school-based administrator leadership, central leadership, executive level leadership, all of that was part of the equation to move the needle in Frederick. And I'm so proud that district carries that evidence-informed, equity-driven lens through everything that they do. And it was somewhat easy for me to step away because I knew that work is the work of many people in that district, and it would live on far beyond my time there, and that there were people who were more qualified than me to carry that mantle forward, and they're doing it. So very proud of them as a model for other districts here in the United States, but they're also a model around the world when discussing how to infuse learning science and evidence-informed practice more broadly at scale, and really proud of them for that.
Well, great. So you were there when, I was going to say initiative, but just had Kent on the phone saying it wasn't an initiative.
Never.
But so I want to kind of go back to the genesis. So you were in the district for that. And at what level of administration, where were you in the I'm going to say hierarchy. I can't think of a better word in an organizational chart. Where were you when that happened?
The whole thing started, I was in mid-level administration. So I had already worked as a teacher and a professional learning leader and a school-based leader, and I was at the central office where I was in charge of learning of all the gifted and talented advanced learners in the district when my interest in learning science was piqued, and I started using that as a lens to change some of the practices that needed to be adjusted in advanced academics. And I think it caught the attention of folks in both our curriculum department, but also our school leadership teams who wanted more of that kind of work. And I had written a book on mindsets in 2016, which was part of the genesis of the work as well, because I quickly saw that people were taking Carol Dweck's work and sort of lethally mutating it into something that it wasn't. And since then, we've all seen sort of how it's not just about putting up posters that say try harder. There's so many nuances to that work that it was really part of the gateway for me into the broader evidence informed space and really asking tough questions about, are the practices that we're using really rooted in what we think, and are they still relevant, or are these things that I learned in teacher education 30 years ago, but really we should be doing differently now that we know better? And so I moved then from that level of leadership to the executive level when a position became available that was in charge of professional learning for all the adults in the district. And that was a design of the prior superintendent who said, I think we need somebody who's overseeing the learning of every adult in our system. And I would like it to be through this lens of evidence. And I stepped into that role.
So you had, I'm going to say, a champion for you, somebody who looked at what you were doing and said, we want this done everywhere. We want everybody in the district to know this.
I think there
So,
was a
yeah,
team of champions, Gene.
okay.
Yes, I would say yes. I think our superintendent at the time, the deputy superintendent, who later became my direct boss in the work, as well as I really believe there was a grassroots movement across the district that people said, we want more of this. This is really where we should be focusing our attention. And so I think it was a group of champions.
Okay, well, I think you're being a little humble here because they're grassroots, but a lot of times they don't grow any deeper and hold on. There are a lot of things, there are a lot of grassroots things that happen, but they never stick. And they never stick because I think they don't have what you just described. So you were in, I'm going to say, a mid-level executive position, yet you needed support from moving upwards, and you needed support moving downwards.
Yes.
And so I think you mentioned that how you did that is just because in your prior positions, people had a chance to experience what you were doing and the success that you had. How about convincing folks upward? And again, this is your story, and I'm asking you in particular, but we're thinking about generalizing things
Mhm.
because here's what been my experience is, first of all, I'll go into school and I have no idea why every administrator's bookshelf has the same books on it. I don't know, there's like did they attend the same conference? What happened? And so when somebody comes in with something, I don't know how to talk. I want to say initiative, but Kent told me don't say initiative. But it has something that is going to help support the district. There really needs to be a lot of folks convinced before you're going to commit to any sort of time or other resources.
Absolutely. And I think I love your vision of the same book on everyone's shelf because I know exactly what that's like. And most of those books aren't very dog-eared or marked up, or
Right.
most of those
Yes.
books don't see the desk very much. They
Yeah.
are on the shelf. And I think there are a couple of things that make the difference. I think one is really being able to take the why is it important for us to ground our work in evidence? Why is it important for us to lean in a little bit more to what's happening in the science of what we do every day, which is teaching and learning? And how does it impact my job? And I think that's one of the things I really spend a lot of time thinking about is I knew that in an executive leadership role, I needed to be able to speak the language of the teacher. I needed to be able to speak the language of the principal. I needed to be able to speak the language of the curriculum leader. I needed to be able to speak the language of the person who manages the budgets and helps to procure the resources for the district. I needed to be able to speak the language of our school board members who are not necessarily educators, but have a great deal of influence and investment in what happens in our schools. I needed to be able to speak the language of a parent who wants to understand, why are you talking about having my student retrieve information and what does that really mean? And so I spent a lot of time thinking about, what does this idea look like at a lot of different levels, and how can I best help to translate what I'm talking about to make this something that is concrete and useful at all of those different lenses. And I think that's one of the secrets, because by doing that, there were lots of people who were very intrigued by the ideas and who also said, well, of course we should be grounding everything we do in the science of how teaching and learning happen. Like, why haven't we always been doing that? And that was sort of this aha moment, I think, that started to permeate the district. I think the other thing is thinking very granularly about, what are the challenges the district's facing. So what does the student achievement data say? What does student attendance data say? What are teachers saying about resources and needs of students? And listening very carefully to what is the big picture of what the district needs at a given time. And I think that's why a lot of initiatives fail, because they're targeted at something very different than what is really going on the ground. And that's why I always try to view things through the evidence informed lens of decision making, which is really, what does the research say? The research that really applies to classrooms. What is the context that you're working within? So, what are the needs of your particular students, of your school, your classroom, your district, whatever that level may be? And then the third, what's the experience and expertise of the people on the ground who are going to carry out that work? What's their instinct? What is their already knowledge saying to them? So, listening very carefully to them, but also, what is their capacity in terms of how do we develop their expertise to carry it forward? Or what kinds of experiences do they need to make this happen? Or even, we have a very, let's say, inexperienced group of teachers at a certain level who may need something very different than a group of very experienced teachers. And so, sort of taking that lens on things helped to be able to tailor the message to Frederick and what Frederick was dealing with in terms of challenge and what Frederick needed moving forward.
But I was talking to Kent. He schooled me on some happenings in Maryland
Yes,
because, and it seemed, I was going to say fortuitous, but it really wasn't luck. The fact that the Maryland legislature passed, laws saying that this is going to be something that's part of all schools' professional development, because it seems to me that, now you had the force of the legislature say, hey, we're doing this. And it seemed like that would be something that would move things along more quickly, kind of some wind in your sails. Did
it
that?
did. But the interesting thing is that really didn't happen until just last year. And so Frederick was already 10 years on the track before that happened. So we don't know the exact genesis of the language in the legislation, but we suspect it had to have originated in understanding that what Frederick was doing was working and innovative. It wouldn't have gotten to the statute if it were not. And so my concern when the legislation came out was, what exactly is it going to mean for Frederick that has already been doing the work?
Oh,
And the exciting thing is that it just meant that Frederick was already well ahead and needed to just think about what it was going to do to both deepen and sustain that work, and how Frederick's model could support other districts that wanted to come along and that were going to be coming along because of the Maryland regulation. So I think it put Frederick in a great position to help its brother and sister districts across the state.
well, it sounds like you left them in good shape. It sounds like there's some plans that to sustain what you did and some good folks there to do it. And now you've moved on, and you moved on in addition to several other things. You're doing some consulting work now. And what are you taking with you? Okay, it's one thing to learn about science of learning and evidence-based practices. It's another thing to have lived it and to have brought it to schools, districts, and sites. So, what insights are you bringing? And I'm going to add a little something else here to this question, and that is, as you are working with other districts now and you reflect on the work in Frederick, was there anything you might have done differently that you're now advising your current clients?
Great questions, Jean. I think in terms of the first one, I don't view the work as much of a consultancy as it is sort of an organization and something that we hope will eventually lead to partner districts all over. Because I believe that one of the things that I was crying out for many years in this work were other people who were doing it. It can be very lonely to be in an evidence informed space when you're surrounded by lots of education noise that's not informed by evidence.
Right.
And I really wanted compatriots on the journey. And so that's one of the things that Dr. Jim Heal and I really want to build in the work that we do with Learning Science Partners. So our work is unique because we provide a lens of here are the principles from cognitive science, educational psychology, instructional design that are most central to evidence informed practice. But beyond just helping people to understand the principles, we bring a lens of infusion and implementation. And as you said, that's really the secret sauce that working in Frederick taught me. And it's the superpower that was granted to me by so many Frederick leaders and teachers who helped to develop in me an understanding of how these principles can be employed and work at scale. And so, what Jim and I do is sort of an elaborate dance between theory and practice. And so, we are looking at not just what does the principle say, but also how does that principle actually live in an environment where teachers can hold it and use it and make best decisions for kids. And also, how does that live in districts so that it doesn't become the initiative of the year or the theme of the week, but it becomes something that is durable and long lasting and part of the fiber of how those districts do business. And so we're working at the current moment with a dozen different districts that range in size from 4,500 students to more than 150,000 students. And so we're really looking at how this work can make a difference for students across the board in two different ways. One, when you're informed by evidence, it really, every student deserves to be taught by somebody who understands how learning happens. But every educator deserves to know how learning happens so they know what to do more of and what to stop doing. Teaching is such a difficult job, Jean, and teachers need to know what is worth putting down as well as what is worth picking up. We can't just keep adding, we call them Christmas tree districts. A Christmas tree district is a district that just keeps decorating and adding one more ornament and one more initiative and one more thing. And pretty soon your tree is falling over because no one can handle the volume of different things they're being asked to do. And so I think it's as much about what you stop doing as it is what you start doing and where you put your focus. So we're trying to build those partnerships and really make sure that people feel like they're part of a network of schools and districts that are doing this work together. And it's very exciting. Now, in terms of what it's teaching me that I could have used in Frederick, great question, too. I think one of the things I'm seeing is that change at scale is uncomfortable. And we knew this in Frederick, but I think it's important to help people realize that making big shifts in districts is incremental work that is slow on purpose. People tend to want to go too fast, Jean. People want to move from a surface level of understanding to quick implementation, and then they want to see really quick gains, and then they want to go on to the next new thing. They want to hang the next decoration on the tree. This kind of work is not like that. This is much more about not just understanding at a surface level an idea. It's not just about knowledge, it's about deep understanding. I like to think about it in the words of Dan Willingham as the difference between brittle understanding and flexible understanding. Districts need very flexible understanding because districts have to respond to lots of different requirements and variables and changes. And so the depth of understanding of a principle is really important. Brittle understanding is never going to stick. And so helping people to realize that it's about less is more in many cases, and sort of resisting that idea of moving back into the mindset of let's just keep hanging new things and seeing what sticks, because we can't afford to do that in education anymore. Our kids deserve better.
You said something that's not the first time that I've heard you or folks talk about, and the idea of, we've got to move slow to go fast, and that we've got to build up this understanding, a deep understanding of what we're doing. And I think there's a paradox and that I've seen, and you could tell me if you've seen this as well, in the not only in Frederick, but in the other districts where you're working now, is that the big move is slow. And the paradox is there are some things that can be done more quickly.
Mhm.
I'll give you an answer. Worked with very early in my career. I was working with a district. I was working for another consulting group, and I went to this district and, asked them what they were doing and what their plans were. And the principal told me, this year, every teacher is going to have a learning objective for a lesson. And he was very proud. That's what they were going to. And I didn't hear that only once. And they said, well, we've got to go slow. And, there are some things that organizationally you need to go slow. But so I'm asking you, as a consultant, have you seen some of those things that you've advising? Well, yeah, we got to go slow, but, we can do this a little bit more quickly.
Yes, I think you're right. I think it's both and I think it's because we certainly have an imperative to do better for students right away. So there are certain things that absolutely you're right are fast changes. But I like to compare the movement of large organizations, and I think this is true even for schools, Jean, to like the way you would move a ship. When you move a ship, you make lots of very small incremental moves in the same direction to move a large vessel. You don't go spin the wheel, because if you spin the wheel of a ship, people fly off. And I think that's a great sort of visual to think about what happens when, we've all read stories of districts where there's a new superintendent who just steams in and decides to change everything, and people are just reeling. Nobody knows what's consistent, what's not. So we think about these small incremental changes, but all in the same direction. And some of them can be done very quickly, but over time, we're seeing a cadence. And I think that's really important. I also think this idea of consistency over time, teachers really appreciate when they come back to school in August, hearing the same language that they heard the year before, rather than, and now we're going to focus this year, we're focusing on engagement. Everybody's going to be, we're only focused, or as you said, to
Yeah.
this year, it's all about the learning objective. Like, wait, what? Last year it was about engagement. Now it's about the learning objective. Next year it's going to be about social emotional wellness. And the year after that, like, we, I think people are pleasantly surprised when they come back in August and someone says, okay, this year, we're going to focus more deeply on effortful thinking. You had an introduction to that last year, and it's part of our ongoing work in terms of becoming more informed by evidence. And so we're going to really be focused on that this year. And you're going to continue to hear about that next year and the year after that and the year after that, too. I think that is also a message that's important for the sustainability of the education profession, because people can't keep up with chasing shiny objects one direction, and then as soon as they're about to score a touchdown, the whistle blows and all of a sudden we're all running the opposite direction against some other great new next fancy thing. So that's one of the things I see is that people want to go very quickly. And while there's a sense of urgency, we have to be urgent about the right things. And we also have to realize that deep understanding is sometimes very necessary to be able to employ strategies appropriately. You have to understand the principles before you can choose the right strategies. And we need teachers to be able to choose strategies in the moment. And sometimes they can't choose the strategy appropriately if they don't understand the why behind what is it about learning that I'm trying to get to here so that I can make the best choice.
And I think part of that goes to, I don't think I'm pushing back on what you just said, but I think part of this goes back to what you said about brittle versus, I can't,
Flexible.
flexible. And I think part of that, you know, part of doing this deep learning is it can't be Meg or Dr. Jim standing up and saying, this is the most, let's go into, it is based in the classroom. And then, oh, wait a second, how come this didn't work as well as they told me it was going to work? And so you have to work through some things because the teachers that I've worked with, especially experienced teachers, they have to realize, oh, wow, they do have some experience doing this and they can help me. They told me this was going to happen and it happened. And so you have some credibility. But until somebody tries
That's right.
something, and even the lethal mutations, I'm good with that. But the teacher saying, you know what, you told me this was going to work. Well, how exactly did you do that? Well, let's talk about it, how it could be more effective. So again, I just don't know. There are some things and in this organization, you have some teachers, like you said earlier, very inexperienced
Hmm.
and try a couple things. Some people who are very experienced. It's kind of like it's theory of instruction. We're going to do 10% new. Only 10% is new. It's very, but we're going to build on everything else that you've done. I kind of rambled a little bit there, but it's very, you have organizations, you have the organizational picture, but then you also have these individuals that make up the organization that could bust out and be the superstars and be the ones that are letting everybody else know. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
And I think that's why we're not so much consultants in the definition of the word, because while we will come into a district.
Meg, I hate to stop you, but you said that earlier that you weren't consultants. Explain to me what you're thinking that people think about what consultants are and what they do and how you guys are different.
When I think about a consultant, I think about it in an educational sense. I think about people who traditionally come in, lead something, and leave. And our work is much more braided into the system. So we may be in an environment where we may come and lead some learning, but we are also probably working with the core team over the course of 2 years. We are also developing the professional learning team. We might be working with the curriculum materials team. We may be, so their instructional coaches may be doing some work with us that then they are going and leading. And so I guess what I'm getting at is a more comprehensive than the traditional consultancy model, which probably has gotten a bad rap, but I did not see a lot of success with consultants in my public education career. I saw a lot more of the flash in the pan. I'm here to deliver a 1 day stand and deliver kind of thing. And then from there, you all take it from here. And I never found it to be very effective. And in fact, many of those folks never asked any questions about the district before they came in. So if you want to learn how to be a bad consultant, I have lots of advice on that.
I know I interrupted you in answering your question, which I don't even remember what you were answering now, but I want to develop this a little bit because you were successful in a district. Now you're working as a consultant, and what you described as what people think of consultants, I I couldn't agree more. In fact, I would go even further and say, if you're a district and that's what you're going to hire, don't hire them. I don't care how big the name is. I don't care how it is. One of the things that I'm proud of in the work that we did is, if somebody contacted us and wanted us to come, oh, we've got our school is starting next week and we want you to come to a 1 day, we say, we're not doing it. We're not doing it. It's not effective. If you want us to train your staff, we're going to have follow-up or we're not coming. And then they would decide whether they were just trying to fill a day and they had a budget, or they really wanted to do some work. So I went to with you 110%, with that.
Yeah,
And
maybe we need a new
yeah,
word, Gene. Maybe we need a new word. The thing that really irked me was when people they would ask to come, because at a certain point, when Frederick, even in this particular work, had already started to receive some publicity for its work in evidence-informed practice and learning science, mind-brain education, people would say, "Oh, I would like to come and work there, and here's what I will come and do." And I always found that to be very amusing because they didn't ask at all about what our conditions were, what we might need, what we were currently doing, what
right.
are the challenges that you're facing. If I went into a school and asked teachers what they need, what would they tell me? They weren't asking any of the right questions. They also weren't talking about connecting me with other people who are doing similar work, or helping to curate networks, or what does long-term durable work look like. They were talking about, I can come and do this for you. And I just, several times, I just remember thinking, this isn't at all what Frederick needs. And so it was very easy to just keep saying no.
Well, I don't want to beat a dead horse. I don't think the horse is quite dead yet, but I think this is so important for site leaders, district leaders, anybody who has a budget for PD, what they're
Yes,
going to spend that budget on. And part of what is so important is listening to all the people who you just talked about, but also listen to the teachers and why they're so disgusted with the PD they get, because nobody listens. And you know what they're not listening to? All the stuff that you just said that
that's
should
right.
go into hiring somebody to make it worthwhile. I know I had a teacher who just retired and who wanted to work for me. And so I had never met her before. And so we're having coffee and she's telling me about all the PD she's given and how she's such a great presenter. And I said, that's good, but tell me about instruction. Talk to me how you actually work with teachers beyond this PD, because nobody remembers. It's a waste of, and that's the best thing that happened is they enjoyed it. Like Zach Rochelle calls him a song and dance consultant. They enjoyed it in the head, but they don't remember anything and there's no impact on anything. So again, the horse is almost dead, but just don't waste your money on that. You're better off having a PLC day and having the teachers work
Absolutely.
together than doing that. Do you want to do the final blow to the
No,
horse?
I think the final blow is, you know, I think one of the things that Jim and I feel really is critical is that we talk about the science of learning. We use the science of learning to teach the science of learning. And I think that's the other thing that often these one-off professional learning options don't handle well. You'll be in a room about how to make sure that people are asking fantastic questions, where everyone is just sitting there listening to somebody talk about asking fantastic questions. No one's actually asking fantastic questions, not even the presenter. And so,
Right.
one of the things we feel is really important is not only are we using the science of learning to teach the science of learning, but we actually take people behind the curtain. And people think this is really interesting. We'll say, a little bit of transparent facilitation here. This is why we are leading you through this particular exercise, because this is a model that you can use. And I'm not talking about the, silly professional learning that we've all been through as well, where, somebody says, open your purse and take out all the things that are in there, and then guess who might have that at the next table. Or let's pretend who's going to be a fork, knife, and spoon, and you find yourself a spoon and a knife to collaborate with. We would never do that.
Yeah.
So I'm not talking about the infantilization of adults, but I'm talking about okay, we've just shared a core idea with you. Now we're giving you time to process that, and we're giving you an actual written form that you're going to do that in. And we're going to give you the deliberate time to do that right now before we have you turn and talk to a neighbor. And then we're going to move forward. And we've done that for a very deliberate reason because we know if you don't process something between, 30 seconds to a minute after you first encountered it, it's not likely to be remembered. And so we're using the science of learning to teach the science of learning. That's very different than what these, is Zach, what does Zach call them?
Song and dance, song and
The song and
dance.
dance. Yeah, that's different than the song and dance team.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In fact, it's interesting when you incorporate all the, things that you're actually modeling, what you're going to be asking people to do. So many times they don't even see it.
Yes. That's
You know,
why we do the behind the curtain moment. We'll
yeah,
say,
yeah,
like, do you notice that we did these things? And
yeah.
Jim and I say to each other, like, should we take them behind the curtain? Yes, we should. Because one of the things we know is whether we're working with school leaders, executive leaders, teachers, whoever it is, they still have responsibility for facilitating learning for their colleagues, their teams, their students. And so they need to go behind the curtain because brains are brains, Gene. We
Right.
learn the same way our kids do. It's just we have to think about what does that look like for adults. And that's why I'm excited that my background in professional learning has really proven to be very helpful in doing this work because I have that piece of adult understanding and how you move systems with adult learners.
Well, I have a theory, and I don't know if you agree with me, but I'm just, I'm not convinced about adult learning theory.
Oh, yeah.
But to me, the difference between adults and kids is that the teachers will tell you to go to hell,
Yes.
without detention, but anyway, I'm with you. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that. Because if we're doing a good job, we have taken as a good job as a consultant and all the things that you did before we get to the site, before we work with anybody. We've asked
Oh,
all these questions,
oh,
all
yeah.
of those things. So guess what? Now we are presenting content that is meaningful to them and is
That's right.
going to be useful. Oh, Meg. Okay. All right. Lots of good stuff. So, in addition to this, you've also got a video series.
Yeah, so we're really excited that Jim and I had the opportunity to work with Edutopia because they wanted to update their How Learning Happens series that they recorded during the pandemic, which was focused on social emotional learning at that time and sort of student belonging. And they really wanted to focus on instruction. And because that's where we want to live, they said, if we do a new series called How Learning Happens, and we focus on instruction, we'd like to get into classrooms where, your learning science principles are living. We want to do some short videos that teachers can watch. We want some voiceover with that, with some experts. And so Jim and I have had the opportunity to work on those videos. They're starting to come out now. And I'm so proud that many of them are in Frederick County Public School classrooms. They're also going to be in some other districts here in the United States. But it's great to actually see the response to those because, Edutopia has a great reach, Gene, and I want to make sure that more of Edutopia's content is grounded in evidence. And this is one way that we can help move that needle. So, Jim and I are thrilled that those are coming out. They highlight some excellent classroom examples and really help people to dive into the science of learning in a very simple way, but there are also going to be ways for us to highlight and show other teachers what good practice looks like in real classrooms with real students.
So they'll be able to access those through Edutopia.
Yeah, they're already coming out. So
Okay.
two of them are out. Another one might be out by the time this podcast lands. So,
All right.
yes.
Great. Well, terrific. We'll be sure to put that in the show notes. Meg, this has been a pleasure. I've asked you a ton of questions. Do you have any questions for me?
I do, Jean. I know that you've spent a lot of your career thinking about coaching. And I want to know, what is it that people can do to make sure that instructional coaching remains grounded in evidence? And I ask this as someone who many times I talk to my friends across the world who go to coaching conferences. And I had one friend who said she went to a giant coaching conference and she was blown away by the fact that a lot of the coaches there have never even taught anything. And she said, Meg, how can they help teachers when they haven't taught anything? And I said, what do you mean? And she's like, no, they've never been teachers, but now they're instructional coaches. I I struggled myself to explain such a thing, but it really made me wonder, what in the instructional coaching world can we do to make sure that our coaching of teachers is grounded in the way people learn and how we should teach as a result?
Well, first of all, it's funny you mentioned somebody came back from a conference. I was talking to somebody, I'm not going to name their name, who we know had attended a similar conference. He said, I just spent 3 days at a coaching conference, and it was like going to a conference for plumbers, but they never talked about pipe. The
Yes.
instruction wasn't talked about. So much. And the reason that I wrote my book is because maximizing the impact of coaching cycles was because there was a void, I thought, with respect to what you needed to do with personal interactions. Now, I'm going to answer your question, I promise. But when we hired consultants, the first thing that we wanted them to do was to already have the soft skills, the durable skills. That's a prerequisite, of course. And I'm just going to say, you're just a decent person. You're just a decent person who cares about others. You don't have to have any particular, I don't know. There's so much of the coaching training is about theory of communication. And, to me, now I'm going to answer your question. When you think about instructional coaching, it should be in capital letters, instructional coaching. you know
Yes.
so because you cannot coach unless you have an understanding now of what good instructional practices are, including everything that you've been talking about. Now, having said that, and Zach Rochelle and I have done a series of podcasts on different topics, and one of the topics was, do you have to be the best teacher to be a good coach? And the answer is, of course not.
Mhm.
Of course you don't. It's a different skill set, but, and it's a big one, you better be competent in instruction. Because if I'm working with Meg, and Meg is an experienced teacher, and she is awesome, okay, I've got two choices. Meg, I want you to think about this one little tweak, okay? Or Meg, I'll see you in 3 months just to check in. But so much of the time we think, especially if you don't know this, what in good instruction looks like, you think, well, I'm hired to be a coach. I better spend a lot of time with them. And the more time you spend, the more time, the more opportunity they'll realize you don't know anything, and I don't want to waste my time. And then you know what happens? They go to their colleagues, they go to the principal, and all of a sudden the coaching program is blown up because they don't know what? Instruction.
Mhm.
So do you have to keep up with the evidence of yes, yes. But I don't think I have to attend a seminar in analyzing dialogue. Mr. Rod, I love Rod, but I think some of that is natural. Some of that is natural. I don't need a checklist to ask Meg. So, that I'm trying to develop a relationship. I don't need a checklist that says, well, what kind of shoes does she wear? Is she a dog or a cat person?
Right.
You fork or a spoon, all of those things. No, a teacher wants to know, do you know instruction? And don't waste my time if you don't.
That's right.
So,
And do you have something to add to my practice? I think that's the other thing. Teachers are hungry for those little tweaks you talked about, Jean, and
yes.
they don't love it when somebody comes into their classroom and just says at the end, "That was great. I have nothing to tell you." That is not helpful. Teachers genuinely want somebody who can help them hone their craft. That is what they want. And that's a great answer. You've really helped me with your answer. So thank you.
All right. My pleasure. My pleasure, Meg. Anything else? Any last words before we say goodbye here?
No, I'm just excited to get the chance to talk to you. And I'm so grateful to so many people, Jean, you included, who are part of the evidence informed work and family around the world who've poured their expertise and kindness into me. And I'm thrilled that I have an opportunity to give some of that back.
We appreciate it, Meg, and I appreciate it very much for you coming on and sharing, and hope to see you soon.
I hope so too. Thanks.
If you're enjoying these podcasts, tell a friend. Also, please leave a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. You can follow me on Blue Sky at G Tavernetti, on Twitter, X at G Tavernetti, and you can learn more about me and the work I do at my website, tesscg.com. That's TESSCG.com, where you will also find information about ordering my books, Teach Fast, Focused, Adaptable, Structured Teaching, and maximizing the impact of coaching cycles. Talk to you soon.